Okay, Jacob. Agents may be listening to this video, so you need to be professional, right? You need to be focused, you need to be serious, you need to be professional. Come on. I know it's hard for you, but you can do it. Come on. Serious, focused, professional. Serious, focused, professional. Serious, focused, professional. Come on. Ow. Okay, maybe that wasn't all that professional. Hey everyone, my name is Jacob, but the trolls, they call me Snowflake. Ow. I hit myself pretty hard on that one. It stings a bit. Um, so those who have been listening to the podcast for a while, or those who go back to videos like the self-introduction and the channel ad that I put up at the beginning of this channel will know that one of the sort of goals of this channel was to kind of raise my public profile. Like, not that I don't enjoy doing these videos. Actually, I feel like it's been actually a really big boon to my mental health to actually be doing these videos every other week, which is, fantastic and wonderful. But sort of one of the big goals I have for the future is that I want to have a career of my own. I want to, be doing other things than this, which I think, a lot of people on YouTube do. And really the biggest goal I have for my life, really, is to become an author, to have my work be published, because I love writing. It's everything to me. And so I figured that I'd make this sort of a video to kind of give my listeners a preview of my work, of my writing. It may pop up a bit more on the channel. We'll see what happens. But also to kind of give a sort of overview of me, of my writing, and of my perspective on my writing to any potential agents who might be directed to this video, because I do eventually want to use this channel as a resource when I start querying agents again, and put this as sort of a section on in my query letter. Because when you're querying agents, one of the things that really helps is if they can see that your work has a market online and that you have a built-in audience already. And that's one of the things I want to do with this channel, is show that my work has an audience there, like people are interested in my work and they want to read it, and B, that I have an audience already there, that there are people who already are interested in my work and would be interested in my books when they get published. And so, yeah, and so I figured that this video would be me kind of going through my history with writing, going through my kind of thought process around writing, my work ethic around writing, but sort of primarily I think talking about my philosophy with writing, why I write, what I focus my books on, and why I write what I write. And maybe some of these beliefs will be a bit controversial. Maybe some people won't agree with it, and that's totally fine. But I just kind of want to put it out there, and I just kind of want to explain sort of my view on the whole thing, and sort of I think also on the discourse right now around writing and stories, and around like what sorts of stories are the most important right now, and who can write those stories. And just, yeah, I just kind of want to sort of give people a bit of an insight into what is actually a really, really important part of my life, and to kind of just explain myself, because this also does affect my political views. This also does affect my views on the world around me, and on especially what's going on right now in the world, because media and writing and stories are inherently political. They are political, and so of course my politics is a part of my writing. And hopefully this will give you guys a bit more of an insight into it, and hopefully maybe it will also make people interested in actually reading what I've written out. Because I actually, as I've mentioned on the channel before, I actually do have a book currently that I am trying to currently find an agent for. It is called Shadow Culture. It is part of a trilogy. I have almost finished the second book. I am literally like just a couple pages away from finishing it, and then I'll go into like the editing process and stuff with that before I start the third book. And so, yeah, I kind of wanted to give people a bit of an insight into sort of who I am as a writer, and what to kind of expect from my work if and when it eventually does finally managed to be released to the public. And so I figured I'd start off with kind of the story of how I started as a writer, how I started writing. Because when I was a kid, actually, believe it or not, writing was actually probably one of the furthest things from my mind as to what I wanted to do with my life. The very first career I ever really wanted to do when I was a kid actually was I wanted to be an artist, actually. Maybe I still kind of would like to sort of do like maybe like an art show or something at some point in the future. But when I was a kid, like actually writing stories was actually something I really didn't enjoy. Like when we were in school, they always had like those short story projects, and I really, really hated actually writing the short stories. It's actually kind of funny. I absolutely hated it. I did not like doing them at all. And it was a struggle for me to really write more than like a page double spaced, really. And basically, I would just rip off kind of whatever I'd been watching or kind of whatever I'd been reading at the time, and I would just turn that in. And often it was fine for like a B or something, and which was all I really ever really wanted in school. But that all I think kind of changed when I started to get like I think I did like grade 7 and grade 8. I think there was like one story I did where like the image of it came very clearly to me, and I wrote it out and I got a really great grade on it. But I think that kind of the one thing that really I think made me really think, okay, like maybe I should actually start thinking about maybe being a writer and stuff was actually I was watching a music video actually. I'm still quite musical in my writing style. Music is very important to my creative process. Yeah, I just kind of watched this music video and this story just popped into my head. I'm really kind of embarrassed actually about what the music video actually was, but it was actually it's really really embarrassing. But it was the Backstreet Boys Incomplete. I know it was the 90s. I'm sorry. I was like what, like 10 at the time I think. What was I at 11, 12 I think. So like I didn't know any better. I'm sorry. It was like the early aughts. They were making a comeback. So, but yeah, I watched the video and this story all of a sudden came into my head, and I had to write it down. And luckily, there was a short story assignment that came up pretty soon afterwards, and I wrote out the whole story. I think it wound up being like 12 pages or something actually, which was more than I'd probably ever written in my entire life up to that point. And I got an A plus on it, which was fantastic. And that was kind of the thing that kind of made me think, okay, like maybe this is actually kind of cool. Maybe this is actually kind of fun. And I did. I had a blast writing that story. And afterwards, I was like, all right, I want more. Like, I want to actually do more short stories now. But unfortunately, that was actually the absolute last short story that we ever did. I think it was like in grade 7, I think. And like for the next year, I was just like waiting for another short story assignment to come up, but it never came. The only time I ever really was able to write another short story for school was in grade 9, which again, I wrote the short story out and I got an A plus on it too. I got, I think, like a 99% on it. And the only thing that got me marked down was that I had like one little comma that I didn't need. I had like one comma splice. Now I use fucking commas like crazy. Screw comma splice, I'm a writer now. I get to make my rules. You tell maybe I need an editor or something. But yeah, and so pretty much all the way through high school and now all the way through university, this was what I had been wanting to do. And ever since then, writing has kind of been the focus of my life. It's sort of what I went through high school knowing that I wanted to do, and what I went to university and why I took English literature and psychology in university, all to make me a better writer. I didn't take a creative writing degree, mostly because the school I went to didn't have them. But yeah, so. But this has kind of been the whole kind of focus of my life. And ever since I graduated university, I have been focused on trying to be a writer. And I have been sending out a lot of query letters. And previously, kind of like the last 2 years, I think, I have been sending out query letters pretty consistently to try and find an agent. And again, like as I said, part of the reason why I started this channel was to maybe try and work to try to get that agent. Because I know that it can take a while to get an agent. And so I'm kind of doing whatever like I can do to make the process easier on myself, and so then that's part of the reason why the channel started. So, uh, but yeah, that's kind of I think a bit of a rundown of my past history, and I've got loads of other stories in the works too. I'm not just a one trilogy kind of person. Don't worry, I've got like how many books do I have planned? I can't even put them all straight, really. I'll probably get into that a little bit later, I think. But I think kind of the reasons why writing kind of really stuck with me and why it kind of really became something I was so interested in because like I've talked about on the channel before about kind of I think my history with being kind of very different and struggling with mental health issues even from a very early age and being, you know, what I'm pretty sure is autistic. And for people like me, expressing our thoughts and our beliefs and stuff is very difficult. And that's kind of why one of this video may not, like the sort of things I talk about in this video may not be all that articulate because it's very difficult for me to put these kinds of things into words. It's very difficult for me to explain kind of my reasoning behind things and why I do things and what I believe. What I believe is like, it doesn't mean that I don't have reasons behind it. It just means that sometimes it's hard for me to find the right words to describe things. And I do that a lot. Like that's a big problem for me is finding the right wording for things. I know that sometimes I come off in a way that I don't intend. I sort of say things in a way that makes people misconstrue them. And I get that and I own that and I'm trying to work on that and writing is one of the ways that I do work on that. But I feel like one of the reasons why writing for me is so important is because it allows me to express things that I can't put into words. Or at least, like, it lets me put into words which I previously was not able to put into words. Because the situations and the ways in which kind of the stories work out, it's much easier for me, like, to act out my beliefs and my thoughts and my experiences than it really is to kind of describe them. It's much easier for me to act them out through my work than it is for me to talk about them. And like not because I'm ashamed or anything or I don't because I don't want to talk about them. Like you can ask me almost anything and I'll tell you almost anything. I'm a pretty much an open book. But like it's just about like the ability to express things. Expressing yourself for someone who is on the spectrum is something that is often difficult. And that's why I think people who are autistic have affinities, things that we do in order to express ourselves. And it's not just things that we love to the exclusion of almost everything else. It's the way we express ourselves. Affinities are kind of, I think, the way we see the world and the way that we express ourselves and the way that we communicate through people. Like we communicate through media, we communicate through our affinities. That, you know, sort of by sharing our affinities with someone, we're kind of able to share our feelings and ourselves with other people. Whereas in pretty much every other way, that sort of thing is very, very difficult for us to do. And writing for me, I truly believe, is my affinity. It's everything. It fulfills me. It makes me feel complete, really. It is really the only thing that kind of like really makes me very passionate. Like I'm passionate, I guess, about a lot of things, but it all eventually relates back to my writing and literally everything I do online and everything I experience in the world today. There's the little voice in the back of my head that says, could I maybe use this for my writing in some way? Could I maybe put this into a book somehow? And yeah, like most of my thought processes throughout my days is about my writing and about what am I going to write? How am I going to write this? Is this useful to my writing? Is this not useful? Can I somehow put this into a book? And stuff. And I'm constantly thinking about it all the time. And I love it. And, you know, I truly believe that writing is the reason I am on this earth. If I didn't have my writing, I don't know what I would do. I'd have nothing really. Life really almost wouldn't be worth living for me without my writing. And like it's everything to me really. I live because I want to write. Like I live to write really. And you know, in the darkest moments of my life, the ones who have come to drag me out of that hole have been the characters. My characters are so real to me. And they've come to me and they've said, like, look, we get that you're upset, but we have stories that only you can write. And so, like, you need to write them. You can do whatever the hell you want to yourself after you've written our stories. Once you've done that, go ahead, do whatever you want, but not until you finish these stories. And yeah, like that's why I write. I do it because I have to. I do it because this is I think the only real way I can express myself in a lot of ways. I mean, people tell me I'm really articulate and stuff. They tend to say that, especially after they found out I'm autistic, and I'm like, yeah, sure. Yeah, like people like me aren't normally articulate. Yeah, thanks. But yeah, but this is where I truly think I am most articulate. And this is where I think I'm truly able to express myself. And it's the only real thing I think that really fulfills me creatively. Like I'm a very creative person. I kind of live to create, I guess. And I have all these ideas for so many different things, but most of it is around books and around stories and stuff. And really, the one thing that fulfills me creatively the most is my writing. And like there's just this feeling of like when you're kind of in that creative zone and like you're writing and the creativity is just kind of flowing out of you and onto the page and it all just is coming so easily and you're writing, you know, paragraphs and paragraphs of it because it's all just flowing and like you're looking and it's like, oh God, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and I really need to go to bed, but let me just finish this paragraph, let me just finish this conversation or this scene. And like you just like almost can't stop it because it's just flowing and it just feels so good and it's the best feeling in the whole wide world. And if I could live in that feeling forever, that would be heaven, really. It's the best feeling in the whole wide world to me. And I'd want it no other way. And that's what writing gives me, and that's what writing does to me. And it also, and like I said, it allows me to express things that I really feel like I can't normally express. But I think it also is, for me, I think, my main means of power as well. When I'm upset about something, when I'm frustrated about something, when I'm angry about something, when I'm happy about something, when I find something beautiful or valuable, I want to write about it. I want to put it into a story and I want to show it to people and let people experience it just like I've experienced it. And I want to just create beautiful stories. I want to create stories that people love and I want to create stories which resonate to people. In the end, that's really what I want to do. I want to create stories that have never been written before, and maybe that's part of the reason why I haven't found an agent yet, is that maybe my stories are hard to market, and I get that, and I own that, but that's how I write, and that's what I want to do. You know, so whenever I approach a topic, I always kind of look around and I always kind of see it's like, all right, what do I feel hasn't really been addressed in this genre yet, or this medium yet, or this topic, where has this topic not been brought yet? And that's really what I really kind of do a lot because like I always write a lot better when I have a starting point. When I have like a way in which, you know, sort of a direction I want to go in, a topic I want to write about. Like it's kind of like that little grit in the middle of a pearl, you know, it's like I can take that and then I can build off of that. Because like if you were to tell me to just write whatever I want, then I have no idea where I even begin with that. And so it's easier for me to kind of have those constraints and stuff. And so, and I sort of didn't originally plan on going this kind of route when I first started writing. And quite frankly, I think some of my earlier work is really kind of terrible, but I also think a lot of writers are like that too. Sort of the direction my writing has gone now, I think has been sort of in a direction of empowerment. And I think it's because I've kind of looked at a lot of genres and I've sort of said, it's like, wow, a lot of these genres are really, really white. Like, especially in genre fiction, which is kind of the main thing I want to focus on is fantasy, urban fantasy especially. Urban fantasy is one of my favorite genres of all. I love it. I love that kind of contrast between like the magical and like the urban and stuff and sci-fi horror and all that stuff. And like I've kind of looked at a lot of that stuff. I'm like, wow, this is really white. And like primarily like looks at white concerns and stuff. And one of the big things I want to do with my writing is I guess at one point kind of looked around and said like, well, I'm here anyway. I might as well try and help people with my writing as well. And so that's kind of pushed me, I think, towards trying to write diverse narratives, trying to write stories, you know, with, you know, that deal with things like bigotry and prejudice and, you know, hatred and stuff. And like it's not exclusively around like people of color either. Like I also look at a lot of media too and I also say, wow, this is really straight. We need to gay this up a bit here. We need to like gay all of this up. And so I'm gay, and so like that's a big, big thing for me with my writing is that I want to write stories. You know, I want to write like own voice narratives about that because Not that I'm opposed to straight people writing gay characters at all. Like totally, like if you want to do it, like try to do it ethically, try to do it respectfully, but I'm not against it at all. But I also feel like I really want to write LGBT stories the way that I want them to be written, where being LGBT is not something that is exceptional, where it's not the exception to the rule, where the gay characters or the bisexual characters or the trans characters are not the sidekicks, where they are the main characters. And like I want to write stories that sort of are geared towards people like me, and not that straight people can't read the stories, but I want to write stories with protagonists who are gay or bisexual. I want to write about the story where, the guy gets the prince and not necessarily the princess. I feel like that's something that we really do need more of in the world right now, in pretty much all regards. And I want to write about my experience as a gay person in sort of the modern world and stuff. And like I said, I want to write stories about where gay people are not the exception to the rule, but where they are normal, where, there are loads of people who are gay. And really, I think that kind of relates to this kind of, I think, one of the big inspirations for me, which is Neil Gaiman's Sandman comics. I absolutely love them so much. I have all of them, and I've like read them all like 5 times, which is like something I almost never do. I absolutely adore Neil Gaiman and his work, and he is one of my biggest inspirations. And when he was writing Sandman, one of the things that when asked about, like, for those who don't know, like, Sandman is one of the big landmarks of LGBT representation, especially in comics, which, have a very, very spotted history, shall we say, around LGBT representation. But when asked about it, Neil Gaiman said, it's like, I write about the world I see, and the world I see has gay people in it. And in the end, that's kind of the world I want to write about too. I want to write about Canada too, because I'm a Canadian writer, and yeah, Canada has a lot of problems that I really hate, but I also want to write about the beautiful things I find in Canada that I don't think like we really find anywhere else. And I want to write about those problems too. I want to write Canadian narratives, but I also want to write about the world I see around me. And that's one of the reasons why I want to write about diverse narratives, is because I see a diverse world around me. I see a world with so many different people and so many different facets of humanity, and I find it all so beautiful. And I want to write about it. And like, I understand that diverse narratives coming from white writers is a bit of a sore spot for some people, and I understand that. And I get that. Like, look, I understand white writers have traditionally not been all that good to people of color and have kind of been appropriative. And for some people, having characters of color in your work as a white writer is enough to be, to be appropriation. And if that's the way that people fall on that, then I have no arguments to refute that. I have nothing to say that will prove that wrong. Like, I validate that as a valid reading of that sort of thing, especially around protagonists of color, which I have a couple stories, I think maybe about 3 or so, as of now, which have protagonists of color. Um, and if that's appropriation, then I totally understand that and I totally own that. But here's kind of the thing, is that, as I've said that when I look at so many of these topics and genres and I see how overwhelmingly white so many of them are, again, like I say, like, hey, I'm here anyway. I might as well at least try to do something about that. And I get that some people would say, like, well, that's not your place. And it's like, again, like, I totally understand and validate that view and that perspective. But I still, there's just like this part of me that just says, like, no, there has to be something I can do. There has to be something I can do with my writing that can help. And that's really what I want to do, is that I want to use my writing, which is everything to me and which I have decided to dedicate my entire life, my every waking moment to, and use that to uplift people who I feel deserve to be uplifted and uplift the perspectives and the struggles which have so often been ignored. And that's partially because I'm one of those people. I'm a gay autistic guy who, and gay people and autistic people still to a large extent do not have a voice in literature. And I want to try and remedy that. But I also feel like, well, like, I want to help other people too who are not me. I feel like that is so important that I use my privilege as a white writer to uplift the writers of color, and the people of color who have talked about their struggles and talked about their cultures and the racism and the sexism and the bigotry and the problems that they face so often every single day in our modern world. And I want to, at the very least, showcase that. And I want to at least shine a light onto it. And I want to confront it and also confront my part in it too. Confront my part as a white person and as a cisgendered person and as a male in that struggle and confront those sorts of things. And I feel like it is through my writing where I am best at doing that. And again, like, I understand that idea of, like, you are a white writer writing about things that you don't understand, writing about, perspectives which are not your own, writing about people of color, and that is a historical problem that has existed throughout Western literature. And I totally get that. I totally understand that. But here's kind of where I fall on that kind of thing. I've waffled back and forth on it a lot. I felt very bad about it, and I felt like maybe I shouldn't do it. But in the end, like, listening to a lot of people of color, listening to a lot of criticism around writing discourse online and, in the world today, I've really kind of eventually come to this kind of conclusion that there are really kind of, I think, the way I see it anyway, there are kind of two schools of thought around this. There are the kind of stay in your lane people, that white people should not write about people of color. They should just, like, write about things that they know, that about sort of their own sphere, and leave all of that to the writers of color to do that. But I also hear a lot of other people of color talking about saying, it's like, well, no, like, why aren't these white writers putting us in their narratives? Like, we deserve to be in their narratives too. And that's what I want to do. I want to put them in my works so that they can see themselves in my work. That includes sometimes with the protagonists of my stories sometimes. I think I have about 3 stories where the protagonists are native. And I feel it is important that if I have a character who is of a different ethnic background, it is important to acknowledge that and to bring that up in the story. And, like, I use that as an opportunity to bring their struggles and their perspective into the story, and use it, I think, to kind of bring a bigger perspective and to bring a more multifaceted perspective to the situations in the story, and also to showcase cultures. One of my favorite topics to look at is around Indigenous culture, Indigenous philosophy, and I come from a family that is very, very pro-Indigenous, and I feel as a Canadian writer, it is my responsibility to showcase the struggles and the beauty of Indigenous people, and to showcase as much of their culture as I am allowed to. Now, because I have several stories which are, like, have Indigenous protagonists, I feel it is important to address that in my stories, address the racism that they deal with in Canadian society and in North American society in general. And I really, really, in the end, like, with that sort of aspect of my writing, is that I write about things that I find value in. I write about ideas that I find beautiful and ideas that I think are important to talk about. And, like, when I research Indigenous philosophy and Indigenous beliefs and Indigenous history and culture, I find so much value there. I find so many things that I look at and I'm like, wow, if this became a bigger idea within the discourse, if this perspective was elevated, if, like, Indigenous people were able to get a stronger voice in our society and people started to take their viewpoint more seriously, and they were, their viewpoint was held in higher regard and was more incorporated into the discourse, like, how many problems would this solve? It would solve so many problems in the world. And that's what I want to do. And so, like, when I have, like, protagonists of color, like Indigenous protagonists, I want to uplift that perspective through those characters. And I get to, like, a lot of people would, I think, would say that that's appropriation. Like, who are you to do that? And I'm like, yeah, I get that. And I totally understand that. But for me, really, the place I come from is to say that, like, I want to write about these things because I find that they are so valuable. And I want to uplift those perspectives and the people who have those perspectives. And I want to say, like, no, like, this is important. These are beautiful beliefs and beautiful histories. And I want to showcase those. And like when people ask me where I got those from, I want to be able to point and say like, this is where I got them from. Those are the ones who have inspired me so much. And I want to be able to direct people there. And that's how I do that. I direct people to Indigenous people and to people of color through my writing. And I say like, they're the ones who have inspired me. They're the ones who I find so beautiful. Go and research them. Go and listen to them. And you will find the beauty that I have found in that too. And in the end, really, the way I kind of see it is that I would much rather be accused of cultural appropriation than whitewashing. Because I feel like that's the kind of dichotomy, is that the stay in your lane versus like putting them into the narrative. It's in the end about the stay in your lane. Like I totally understand it. I totally validate it. It's totally a valid perspective. But I feel that in the end, we live in a diverse world, and the problems with which we are dealing with right now in society are problems that affect many different types of people and in many different ways. And I want to be intersectional in my writing. And telling me to stay in my lane means I cannot be intersectional. It means I cannot fight for you. And I would much rather fight for someone and fail than never do it in the first place. I fight for people through my writing, and that's what I want to do. And if that's appropriation, then I own that. But I would much rather appropriate than whitewash. I would much rather attempt at least to bring the struggles and the culture forward and confront the problems that people who maybe not like me, but who are also like me, but maybe not like me, face every single day of their lives, and bring those forward and maybe fail at it, then ignore them altogether, because that's a problematic thing too. I would much rather appropriate than whitewash. I would much rather try to fight for someone, try to uplift someone, and fail in some people's eyes than just not bother altogether. And also, as well, I think it is also, quite frankly, ridiculous to expect that writers of color be responsible for all diversity or all works that confront bigotry and racism and, the problems in our society. Because let's face it, like writers of color have enough of a problem getting into the business as it is. And the writing industry in the Western world, in Europe and North America, is still so overwhelmingly white. It's ridiculous to expect writers of color to be responsible for all of those works. And I see so many writers of color talking about how, like, they don't want to talk about racism. They don't want to write about it. They write their books specifically to escape racism. And if nothing else from my work, through the confronting of bigotry and racism and prejudice, and not also exclusively racism too, but like by confronting racism with my own work, with diverse casts, and with occasionally, not often, but occasionally protagonists of color, maybe at least then there is at least one writer out there who now doesn't have to be burdened with that struggle on their own anymore. They at least now don't have to struggle through that on their own, and they can at least write a book that doesn't talk about that. At least one writer doesn't have to talk about that now, you know? Like, I understand the push for own voice narratives. Own voice narratives are so important. They are absolutely so important, and that's a big thing of my work too. I want to write own voice narratives. I want to write about gay people like me. I want to write about autistic people like me and mentally ill people like me. But I also feel like if your definition of own voice narratives is that you only get to write about your own voice, that you only get to write about things that affect you personally, you only get to write about your experience, isn't that just another type of cage, really, in the end? Isn't that just exchanging one cage for another, one type of silence for another? Like, writers of color should be allowed to write whatever the fuck they want. And that's another thing that I want to do with my writing. I want to help and make sure that they can write whatever the fuck they want. That I want to write the stories that maybe they don't want to have to write. I want to write the stories that hold the mirror up to society and say, look, this is how ugly you can be to some people. So that way maybe a writer of color doesn't have to do that. And like I also have no illusions, no savior complex or illusions about saving anyone. I promise. Like, I know I'm not going to solve all of the problems, but I at least want to try. I at least want to do my part and help. And I also understand that there are some stories that are not for me to write. I would not write, like, even though I have a couple stories about protagonists of color, I don't write stories which criticize those cultures. Like, if I have a protagonist of color, I will occasionally talk about that, character's, like, if I have, for instance, character, an Iroquois character in my stories or an Iroquois main character, I will bring a little bit of Iroquois culture and have them talk about that a bit and have them at least attempt to have them look at things through a perspective that is informed by that and through the research I do into those cultures. But at the same time, I also would not write a story that is exclusively about that. Like, I would write a story that can still stand on its own outside of that. I would sprinkle it in and put that veneer over it and add that where I can, and add the critiques of racism, add those sorts of things in, but also at the same time try to write a story that can survive without that. Because I understand that it's not my place to write about someone else's culture. And I understand, especially when it comes to indigenous cultures, that some cultures don't want themselves reflected in other works. They don't want other people talking about them at all. And again, I totally validate that. And I understand that there are a lot of stories out there that are not mine to write. I would not write a story that is very heavily dependent on having an intimate knowledge of another culture. Mostly really because I would not feel comfortable in that. I would not feel like I would be comfortable in my knowledge of that sort of thing. I wouldn't feel like I would be able to do justice to that idea. And so I would leave that for another person, for a writer of color to do. I would not write a story set in a residential school. I would not set a story, in the sort of backdrop of slavery, of, the transatlantic slave trade. I wouldn't write those stories because I understand that those are not my place. But I still feel like I still have a place there. I have to believe that even I, as a white writer, still have a place to uplift perspectives that maybe, are outside of my culture, and to uplift the perspectives that I hear every single day when I listen to people of color and trans people and, other people who are outside of my spheres. And I want to do right by them, and this is how I feel that I am doing right by them. And if you don't feel that that's my place, then I totally understand, and you are totally justified in believing that, in feeling that way, and in having that perspective. But I would at least hope that people will listen to this and understand that this is where I'm coming from, and this is where I've fallen on this perspective. And yeah, it may not be where you fall on it, but I still have to believe that there is a place for these stories that I'm writing. And I absolutely try my absolute hardest to be respectful of these stories. I totally, absolutely work to because I want these stories to be empowering. I want people to be empowered by my work. If I fail in that, I fail as a writer, and I don't want to fail as a writer. And so I try my absolute hardest to work and make sure that people can feel uplifted and empowered and validated by my work. And if I ever fail at that, then I own that, and I will take the criticism from that, and I will take that criticism and work to do better. But if your criticism of me is you aren't allowed to do it ever, then I'm sorry, but that's just not going to work for me, because I want to fight. I want to work, and I want to use what I have to make other people's lives easier, and this is how I feel I can do it. I am literally dedicating my life to this, dedicating everything I think about, my every waking moment that I think about writing, to doing that. And if that's not enough for people, well then, I'm sorry, but I have nothing else really that I can do then. Then you're saying that I can't fight for you. And I also want to show that diverse genre fiction can sell, and I want to pave the way for future writers of color, because from my experiences querying people, querying agencies and stuff, what I think kind of taken away from it all is that the literary world likes what has already been done. It likes things that tread similar paths, not necessarily like copycats, but things that they can market in a similar way that they've marketed other things. Maybe that's why I've had such a problem trying to find an agent, right now, but I don't know. But and so by me writing about diverse casts with diverse characters and the occasional, not always, but the occasional protagonist of color, hopefully a future writer of color will be able to come along and say like, hey, like that guy, wrote that story with an indigenous protagonist, but he's a white guy. So how about a story with an indigenous protagonist written by an actual indigenous person? And I want to also like be able to have these books be a reference for future people to be able to bring in and say like, hey, this book sold well, my book will probably sell well too. And I want to help to pave that way for people too. And I want to use it to support writers of color and trans writers and other, people like that. People who are not like me, but also people like me too, gay writers, autistic writers, and show that we can write beautiful things and do great things in the literary world. And just, yeah, hopefully that has all made sense. I really just kind of want to just put forward just how much I want to help. I just want to help. And this is how I feel is the best way I can help. And I really do feel more than anything that people should be allowed to help in the best way they feel they can. That sometimes people can't help in the way, like I feel that there are a lot of people out there kind of in the left-wing progressive world in which I find myself, in which, I'm a proud member of, sort of telling people that you can only help in a specific way. And I feel like that is a bit of a toxic way to look at things. Because I feel like there are people in this world who really feel like they can only help in a specific way. And maybe it's important for them to open up and maybe say like, hey, maybe I can actually help in other ways too. But in the end, I feel like certain people feel comfortable doing things in a certain way, especially autistic people like me. Like, we can only really do things in a specific way. And telling us to do things the way that you want us to do is kind of a problematic thing to ask of us. It's kind of a problem because there is a long history of that. And every autistic person has an experience of that. And so, like, I feel like people should be allowed to help in the ways in which they feel most comfortable. If that means, going out and punching Nazis, then totally do it. But if that involves not punching Nazis, then they totally should be allowed to do that too. And like, yeah, they should listen to criticism of that. I mean, every way of doing things has, every reaction has equal and opposite reaction, like every approach has downsides. But I feel like we have the right to be diverse in our approach. And I just want to be part of that diversity of approach, you know? And hopefully I've made that clear and hopefully I have articulated that well. And I don't expect to persuade people because I don't feel like people who don't agree with me are wrong, but I just hope that they acknowledge my perspective. And that doesn't have to be where they fall on it, but I just hope that they acknowledge it and say like, yeah, like I understand that you're trying to help and I appreciate that. It's not the way I would have you do things, but I validate that. And if people, and like, I just hope that there will be people who will find my work empowering. And I do believe that there will be people who will appreciate my work and find my work empowering. Because I see so many people call for the sorts of work that I write about. I see so many people calling for white writers like me to write more diverse narratives. And, white writers are responsible for most of the diversity in literature. And again, like going back to sort of the idea of the stay in your lane, like if all of that diversity, if all white writers stopped writing diverse narratives and it all just went away, is that necessarily a good thing? I don't think so, personally. And I want to contribute to that diversity. And so hopefully I've been articulate enough in that. If I haven't, then you understand why I've said that like my writing is where I really feel like I am the most articulate. It's especially around these sorts of things. These are the sorts of topics I want to confront with my writing. And that's why I feel so strongly about these sorts of things, because this is the sort of topics I tackle in my writing. And maybe some people would say like, well, that's not really your place to tackle it. And like, yeah, I totally get that. But hopefully I can contribute to the discourse around it. And I don't mean in a way of, like I used to talk about like, oh, I want to like analyze racism. And I get that that came off wrong. But what I really meant was that I want to confront these issues. I want to tackle these issues. And I want to say, like, hey, these are big problems. And I want to show how big of a problem a lot of these issues are because, and like, not just exclusively racism, but bigotry and prejudice and institutional problems as a whole. And that's sort of the other thing, too, is that I don't exclusively write about, you know, people of other races than me. I write about loads of other things, like, but like, I talk about people of color a lot because that I think is kind of the most contentious around, of course, being a white writer. But like, I want to confront bigotry. Part of that is racism, but bigotry as a whole. I want to confront it with my work, and I want to show sort of the different layers and the different identities that this affects. I want to show the different layers and the different facets of bigotry and the way that these sorts of things overlap on one another. Because not only is that, I think, an important thing to write about, but I also find that sort of thing fascinating. Like, when I write about these sorts of characters that experience things that I don't necessarily experience, I find I've become so much more empathetic. Like, I'll write these situations and I'm like, wow, I never actually kind of thought of things from this angle before, but wow. And I sort of, it's also kind of a journey for me. This is kind of my journey to become more empathetic as a person and to see things from another perspective. And I kind of want to share that with other people too. And just, yeah. Sorry if I'm rambling on with that sort of stuff, but I want to show people how passionate I am about this. And I want people to see things from my perspective and understand where I'm coming from, even if this isn't where they fall on it. And just, yeah. So I guess I'll finish this off kind of, I guess, by giving a bit of an overview of the current work I'm working on. The current series I'm working on is the Shadow Trilogy. The current book I am shopping around is my book called Shadow Culture. And basically sort of what it talks about is it's a book that is about vampires. But really what I wanted to do with it is I wanted to do something a bit different. I wanted to take a more realistic take on vampires. And I wanted to put them into the modern world. And basically kind of the theme of this book is I want to ask the question of what would vampires be like if they were in the world right now as it is? Like, what would they be like, and what would a world be like in which vampires had existed and always have existed, in which, humanity and vampires have evolved in parallel to one another? What would their history be like? How would that change the politics of the world? How would the politics around them be? What would their cultures be like? What sort of like cultures in different parts of the world too? Because let's face it, vampires have been overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly privileged. And in fact, there are people who have talked about how vampires are really kind of like this image of privilege and wealth, and interpreting them through like the aristocracy leeching life out of the lower classes. And I kind of wanted to take a bit of a different angle to that because this didn't come out of nowhere either. Like, this came about as a result of me looking into sort of the vampire myths of the past and finding really that up until fairly recently, vampires have been this kind of external force, and even maybe currently too. But like for so many, like pretty much for the entire history of vampire narratives, they have always kind of been this external force, this force that exists in opposition to the group in which, the author so often finds themselves. Ancient myths around these vampire-like creatures are almost always this external threat and have often been used as labels to demonize other races and other peoples in which different cultures have found themselves in opposition. The Romani, for instance, are often portrayed very vampiric-like. And I wanted to kind of explore that kind of idea, that the idea of, hey, if vampires, lived in the world right now, most of them would probably be people of color. They probably wouldn't be this white aristocratic image that we have. They would probably be mostly people of color. They would probably, be, especially in Europe, most of them would probably, I think, be Romani. And so I really want to explore that. And really, I think, kind of what I call re-other the vampire. I want to show the origins, really, I think, of vampire fiction, which is around this external threat coming in, and the ways that vampires have been used to demonize other cultures and demonize other races. And I think you really still do see it today. you see, I think, a very kind of vampiric kind of narrative around immigrants and around people of other races and stuff, you know. You see this, I think, around things like the welfare queen, this idea of, you know, people of color who just leech off of the system, who just suck tax dollars out of the system like a vampire drinking blood, you know. Or, you know, you see this around illegal immigration, you know, illegal immigrants stealing jobs, you know, sucking good jobs out of the economy away from the supposedly deserving white majority, you know, like it still happens. We still see so many people in our society today as parasites, as like vampires, sucking the life out of people, especially nowadays with the rise of neoconservatism, with the rise of the alt-right, with the reestablishment of neo-Nazism in our world. The narrative of neo-Nazism is so intrinsically tied to this image of people of other races, you know, being parasites and sucking, you know, the life out of, you know, the supposedly good, deserving people. And I really kind of wanted to deconstruct that with this story and really kind of say, like, hey, like vampires, if they lived, would be people of color. And like they are just like everyone else. And if vampires are just like everyone else, then what right do we have to look at other people in this way? And yeah, that's kind of what I want to look at with this book. The sort of basic plot of the book is the main protagonist is a young man called Crow Carnestein. Now, the Carnestein family is, of course, based off of Carmilla Carnestein or Karnstein. The readings, I think, are a bit different. I used Karnstein because I think I kind of like the sound of it more. He is a descendant of Carmilla Karnestein. The Karnestein family is world famous because they were kind of seen as one of the most powerful and wealthiest vampire families to ever emerge. And they kind of were the driving force behind the establishment of the vampire nation in Eastern Europe known as Baldoon. But at the same time, Crow has kind of been kicked out of the family. His grandfather married a Roma woman and was kicked out of the family. And Crow, kind of on both sides of his family, is Roma. He's kind of white passing, but he's kind of both of his parents are very strongly like come from very strongly Roma cultures, you know. And unfortunately, when he was a kid, both of his parents disappeared and are presumed dead. And he kind of still lives in the aftermath of that, of experiencing this kind of this one singular act of prejudice, of extreme hatred and bigotry, and it's kind of colored his perspective. And the current story is all about kind of him and those around him reacting to the rise sort of almost of the alt-right actually. And I wrote this actually before the alt-right actually emerged, believe it or not. I'm actually quite shocked actually how like much this has kind of followed my kind of the narrative I kind of brought out. I've been saying like the rise of the alt-right and the rise of Trumpism has kind of actually made like my story all the more realistic actually. So like get it while you can because it's relevant now. But yeah, and so what happens is that there is this group called Carpe Nocturnum who kind of starts posting these videos online and who starts kind of these string of hate crimes against vampires who say like their whole thing is that they want to Carpe Nocturnum take back the night. And they say that vampires are responsible for all of this, all of these terrible things in the world, that they slaughter humans like cattle and all of this stuff, and have all of these conspiracy theories around vampires. And it's kind of about Crow and the people around him kind of having to deal with this and kind of having to deal with the ramifications of the rise of this group. But it's also too, I think, about the human character. There's a police officer named Mick Miles who is assigned to look after Crow and his family because his guardian is a consul in a vampire consulate in North America. I think the city is probably New York, but I kind of sort of intend it to be kind of in every city, at least in the first book anyway. Yeah, and it's also about kind of Mick as well, kind of coming to terms with, wow, I'm actually kind of part of a system which has kept vampires and also other people too, and people of color too, down, which I'm kind of part of this system which has kind of been constructed to keep so many people in the world down and oppressed, and about him trying to kind of fight back, but also maybe kind of realizing that there's only so much he can do as a member of that system. And yeah, That's, I think, kind of what the whole story is about, really. And that's kind of how I wanted to take the vampires in the story and make them political, because I don't think vampire narratives have ever really been political, but I feel like there is such a very strong political interpretation there. And also not just around people of color either. I also think that there's a very strong ableist reading as well in my books too, because vampires, being nocturnal creatures, their eyes are very, very sensitive to light. And so they have to walk around with sunglasses on even at night because the human constructed world around them is so bright that they need this kind of a shield just to be able to exist in it, just to be able to go places. And so many places close at night that they now are shut out of. And so yeah, so I also think that there's also a very strong ableist narrative there as well around how like institutions in our world are geared for a very specific type of person, and that there are people who those sorts of rules do not work for, who cannot meet those expectations by no fault of their own. And yeah, I have a bit of a summary here. If this summary is terrible, I greatly apologize, but like part of sort of the problem with my autism is that I'm really, really terrible of summarizing things. Like I want to expand things, and like, the more I can expand things, the happier I am, and I love like delving into like big details and stuff like that. And so like asking me to compress everything down into this, all the complexity that I try to build into my work down into like a little part is very, very difficult for me. And it's one of the things that I would really be looking forward to an agent helping me with, because I acknowledge that that is one of my big problems. And so yeah, so if this summary is terrible, then you know why, but this is also maybe kind of why I really want an agent, why I really look forward to eventually one day getting an agent and an editor who can help me with this sort of thing. So the summary goes: after the disappearance and suspected murder of his parents over half a lifetime ago, Crow learned just how cruel the world can be to his kind. So, when a group calling itself Carpe Nocturnum claims that it will wipe all vampires off the face of the planet, Crow wished he could say that he was surprised. And when Officer Mick Miles is assigned to protect him and his adopted brothers, John and Carr, from the threat of Carpe Nocturnum, Crow is determined that Mick will have to earn his trust and prove that he actually wants to help them, that he actually wants to learn about the realities that vampires face, and how the police have treated vampires. However, Crow and his loved ones are going to need all the help they can get, because Carpe Nocturnum has a vile vision for the world, and they are determined that their crusade will start soon. Crow and his makeshift family will have to face a hatred as old as mankind itself, and Crow will be forced to re-examine the most painful chapter in his life, because help is coming, but maybe not the help that he was hoping for. And the last part is a little bit enigmatic. It's part of kind of another thing I kind of wanted to explore with the book, which is kind of the rise of extremist groups within minority groups as well, and kind of how these groups emerge and the conditions in which these groups emerge. And I don't kind of want to give too much away of the plot. Maybe I already have, but yeah, I kind of wanted to explore that and maybe kind of say like, hey, like the conditions that these groups emerge into don't occur in a vacuum. Like these groups, yeah, they do terrible things, but they don't emerge out of a vacuum. They emerge out of a legitimate concern and a legitimate reason why they exist. There is a good reason why these have emerged, and to kind of also explore that as well, and to also maybe say like, hey, like when you are oppressed, when you are faced with groups like Carpe Nocturnum that hate you for no other reason than the fact that you are different than them, and the fact that they have constructed all of this justification around their prejudice and all of this justification so that they can go out and try to murder you, maybe that kind of a response, like, yeah, it's not necessarily the best response, but it's not a response that you can blame people for. That you can't blame people for feeling like that's the only way to do things, especially when the institutions that are supposed to stand in the way of groups like Carpe Nocturnum don't. And that's another thing that, again, the book really delves into, is the role of institutions that are supposed to stop Carpe Nocturnum but don't, but in the end actually kind of wind up helping them as well. And again, that's kind of another thing that emerged as well. And actually kind of the interesting thing about this story is that I had originally finished the book a long time ago. I think I finished it probably in my first year of university, actually, which was maybe longer ago than I care to admit. But I finished it around then, and then I went on and I did another book from another series that I plan on doing once I finish the Shadow trilogy. And I finished that book, and that one took me a long time. That one took me a really long time to finish. And so once I finished it, I came back to Shadow Culture, which wasn't even called Shadow Culture at the time, actually. I changed the title when I rewrote it. I sort of said, like, I need to rewrite this because my style is so different now. I've evolved so much as a writer that I need to rewrite this. I need to pretty much completely rewrite this story. And so I did, and I started in, I think I was about maybe 10 pages in when Trayvon Martin was murdered, and sort of the start of what would eventually become the Black Lives Matter movement today. And all of that kind of hung in the back of my head throughout when I was writing the book. And like the book always kind of had like a prejudice kind of undertone to it. It always kind of dealt with it a bit, but it became much more of an overtone and a much more central aspect of the story through that. And so I guess I was kind of inspired by everything that's been happening kind of now currently in our current political climate. And I guess that that's really tinged my, I guess, perspective now as a writer, and also why I feel so passionate about writing the way I do. All of this, everything that's kind of happened in the last couple of years has colored I think kind of led me to this point of thinking the things I have, of thinking about kind of my place and wanting to help. And yeah, I've gone into that a lot already, and I guess I don't want to go into it anymore because I don't want to bore people or anything. But like I just hope that like that is I think why I've come to this point. I've done a lot of thinking around all of that stuff, and this is the conclusion I've come to, and this is what I want to do. And so hopefully that this book sounds really interesting to people. I really hope it is. I love it. I think it's fascinating. I love, love, love writing it. And just, yeah, any agents who are listening to this, you can find me on Twitter. You can contact me on Twitter at jjacobmarian. You can reach me through the show's Twitter at sfrantsreviews. And please contact me at any time, and I will get back to you. And I'll be so happy to send you pretty much whatever you need. I'll send you a query letter. I'll send you a comparative titles list. Anything. Like, ask me for anything, and I'll send it to you. And hopefully you guys are interested. And thank you for listening. To my audience, hopefully this has been illuminating to you guys. Hopefully this has maybe whet your appetite for hearing more of my writing. I would love for more of my writing to pop up on the channel. And I plan at some point, I don't know when, to do maybe like a reading of maybe the first couple chapters of Shadow Culture on the channel. But of course, me having a lot of speech problems and stuff, I'm kind of hesitant to do that. But if you guys are interested, then I'll totally do it. And hopefully this has also been illuminating as to like where I come down on a lot of topics and stuff, especially around appropriation, around literature and writing and stuff like that, and my role as a white writer in the current political climate. And if you guys don't agree with me, then I totally understand, and I would love to hear from you guys about that. I will take criticism about that, and I will take people's concerns, and I am totally happy to have discussions and debates around that. I am totally happy to have those discussions and debates. I would love to. Please put them in the comments below if you have any of those concerns. And I hope I've explained myself well, and I hope I have justified all of this well. I hope I have maybe convinced some of you. I don't expect to have convinced any of you, because your opinions on this are valid. But hopefully I've at least explained my perspective where it makes sense, and people can see the logic in it, and people can see where I'm coming from and appreciate that. And so, yeah, I think I'll stop boring you guys and let you, especially any agents who may be listening to this, I think I'll let you all get back to your very, very important work. Feel free to leave now. And to my listeners, I've actually realized that I actually haven't been telling you guys to like, share, and subscribe. Don't know why I would have to tell you guys that. I mean, you guys are smart enough to know that, I assume. But anyway, please like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell. Hit that little bell down there below this video if you want to get notifications for when the videos come up. Every like helps. Every like lets me know that people have watched the video and that people like my videos, and that's always great. Every share lets me out to a bigger audience, and I really do need a bigger audience for this channel. And yeah, again, hopefully I'll be getting my Patreon up and running soon. Don't know exactly when I'll get around to it, but hopefully I'll get around to it soon. And yeah, next video will be a review. I think it's going to be of an anime that I really, really love. And so I know, I'm sorry, another anime, but I warned you. I warned you before.